The Case for an Intellectual Revolution in Rwanda, Exposing the Machinery of Indoctrination and Reclaiming the Right to Think. Written by Gabriel Ndayishimiye. Published by Liven Books, Section 1. Introduction. Why an Intellectual Revolution? Rwanda has never had a revolution, not in any serious or dignified sense of the word. What it has had are blood-soaked contests of power, tribal skirmishes dressed up as politics, and ethnic vendettas masquerading as history. These were not revolutions. They were the theater of small men, obsessed with ruling but terrified of thinking. Rwanda does not need more of this tragic spectacle. It needs, for the first time, a revolution of minds. The Rwandan people have been domesticated into silence, like obedient pupils at the feet of a teacher who demands nothing but recitation. They have been permitted to hear, but never to answer. Governance in Rwanda, as in many post-colony settings, and I use the word with a sense of exhaustion, is not a dialogue between the people and those they supposedly elect to represent them. It is a sermon delivered from a pulpit of power, uninterrupted by thought, immune to doubt. Rwandans are not citizens. They are extras in a grotesque national play, reciting lines they never wrote, clapping for acts they never chose. The curtain rises and falls on command, and they applaud on cue, as if their very existence depended on staying invisible. Is this freedom or submission, masquerading as order? The dull obedience of a people trained not to live, but to endure. Can that be called life at all? Elevated to art, sterile, immaculate, and performed with the precision of the well-trained animal that no longer dreams of escape. What they parade as peace and progress is stitched together by the brutal silencing of thought. Order here is not born of agreement, but of fear, lacquered over with the illusion of unity. Education has never been a path to enlightenment, but a stable where minds are broken in, trained to bow, trained to fetch. In Rwanda, thought is a hunted thing. To question is to expose yourself. Silence is a leash, and the obedient are patted on the head. Words are stripped of meaning and reduced to chance, repeated like the tricks of an animal that no longer remembers the wild. Is this freedom, or the machinery of rule so brittle it dreads even the act of thinking? Can a regime so fragile that it trembles at the rustle of a single independent thought ever truly claim strength? What power is this that fears one mind breaking ranks as if truth itself might tear through the thin fabric of its authority? Indeed, in Rwanda, true education has never existed. It has never been defined, never demanded, never desired by those who rule. What passes for education here is a ritual of control, a performance of knowledge without the slightest breath of liberation. Schools are not sites of awakening, but extensions of the state's machinery, factories where young minds are shaped not into thinkers, but into mimics, polished to recite and trained to obey. It is not enlightenment, but entrapment. This is why we speak of revolution, not the tired spectacle of crude violence, but the far more subversive and unsettling force of thought. Liberation, in its most dangerous form, begins with the mind that refuses to bow. The chains in Rwanda are not forged in iron, but in the everyday rituals of silence, in fear polished into virtue, in the gradual, almost imperceptible theft of the will to resist. It is this theft that must be undone. Has power in Rwanda ever truly changed, or has it merely worn different masks, each more refined in its domination than the last? The colonizer has left, yes, but did he not leave behind his tools, his blueprints, his appetite for order without freedom? Control here is not reinvented. It is inherited, polished, perfected, localized, yet always foreign in spirit. It thrives on imitation, not innovation, repeating the colonial script with local actors who now claim ownership over its techniques. This is the enduring legacy of power without imagination, domination without depth, a rule that survives by mimicking the very forces it once claimed to resist. And what of history? Is the past remembered, or is it manipulated, bent into an instrument of discipline? The trauma of genocide, sacred and unhealed, becomes the state's shield and weapon, a memory used not to heal, but to command. When has memory served the people, and when has it been co-opted to silence them? We are calling for an intellectual revolution, not as a luxury, not as an academic dream, but as the most basic demand for dignity. In Rwanda, this remains a radical proposition, an affront to power that has never trusted the people with their own minds. A people stripped of the right to think are not citizens, but captives. A nation that punishes thought does not stand proud. It crouches, trembling, before the truths it cannot bear to hear. This so-called republic has long thrived on imposed truths, on fabrications passed down like sacred relics, but truth, real truth, does not descend from pulpits of power. It emerges from doubt, from defiance, from the courage to create what was never allowed. It begins when fear is no longer sacred. Rwanda must rise, not as an echo of its rulers, but as a repudiation of them. It must awaken, not with their blessing, but against their will. Freedom is not the privilege of being ruled kindly. Freedom is the audacity to refuse rule altogether, to seize the world as one's own, not through inherited scripts, but through the raw breath of experience, through suffering made articulate. I am writing not out of choice, but because to remain silent in the face of such decay is to partake in the charade. This silence, this deafening stillness that hums beneath the surface of a nation teetering on the brink of intellectual collapse, is repulsive. What follows is not an invitation to debate, but a mirror held up to a country too accustomed to looking away. I am laying out, piece by piece, the anatomy of our ruin. I am making the case, the only case that now matters, for an intellectual revolution in Rwanda. Please, hear me out.